were in community with each other and supported people to become nurses or just to be able to take care of their own families. And by doing that, it's not just the people of the state of New York versus Tracy McCarter. It puts the people on the other side. And so that means that when a group gets together to join in a collective defense campaign for someone like Tracy, as Survived and Punished did, they're actually making a really powerful statement about the system's claim to be the people or to support the community. And when you're sitting in that courtroom and you see all of that red shirts, you feel it. The only group of people in that room were the group in red shirts supporting Tracy, demanding that the charges be dropped. And let's be clear, Alvin Bragg may have tweeted, "I stand with Tracy," but these charges would not have been dropped were it not for the campaign on her behalf, supporting her and living out other understandings of community and safety. And so my book talks about the Stand With Tracy campaign, and it also talks about other ways that people are collectively pushing back against criminalization and against the isolation of Black and brown and other marginalized people through other tactics, things like community bail funds, court-watching groups, participatory defense hubs, and even groups that get together and make people's budgets and show us how we can live out community and safety without criminalization. But this story was one of the ones that really touched me the most, and so it's such a pleasure to be here with Tracy today.
And can you also talk, Jocelyn Simonson, about other cases like Marissa Alexander? Now, that might ring a soft bell for some people. Her case made famous by the killing of Trayvon Martin, but how this happens to people around the country.
Yes, Marissa Alexander, part of the reason we may remember it is that Survived and Punished was also involved in this campaign. And this was a case in Florida, and it was often contrasted to the case of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, and was acquitted, and was allowed to use Florida's ideas of self-defense, in contrast to Marissa Alexander, a Black woman who was denied the ability even to use the defense of stand your ground in a Florida court. Also a criminalized survivor, and also someone who, when people were collectively supporting her, and this was a national campaign, which is why we might remember it, when people were supporting her, it wasn't just, let's help this young criminalized Black woman. It was also, let's realize how this is not an isolated incident, how we take punishment and criminalization and cages instead of care and community and support, and how we actually could be doing the opposite. And so it's campaigns like that for Marissa Alexander and dozens of other people across the country, Black women, brown women, queer people, trans people, who, because of their identity, as Tracy said, the system is able to marginalize them. And so when a group comes along and says, no, we stand with that person, right? We stand with Marissa. We stand with Tracy. It's actually a really powerful, larger statement, both about the criminalization of survivors, and especially Black and brown survivors, but also about the use of the criminal law at all to deal with harm and to deal with care. And so part of the message that has come out from people like Miriam Kaba, who Tracy mentioned, is that we can look at this phenomenon, the criminalization of Black and brown women who have survived interpersonal harm, and we can say, this teaches me not just that we shouldn't use the criminal system to solve that problem, but that maybe the criminal system and these criminal courts that we sat in for Tracy's case over and over aren't capable of bringing us justice. And how do we know that? It's because we see campaigns and groups living out other versions of community and care.
I like to jump in there, too, because I urge everybody to read Jocelyn's book, because it really gives an idea for people who don't know what this idea of participatory defense is. It's where the community comes together in different ways, all the ways that you mentioned, like court watching, which was integral in my case, right? And also a community defense team. If you want to know how dangerous the system thinks participatory defense is, I think you have to look no further than the ruling dismissing my case. So I was in court in front of Justice Diane Kiesel, who has written a book about domestic violence, and I believe has written a book about civil rights. And so this is a person who should be intimately familiar with the things that I was facing. And you would hope to be a little sympathetic about the things that I was facing because of her knowledge. And yet, if you only have to look at her ruling to discover just how threatening she thought participatory defense was. She cites all of the activism that was at play. She talks about those red shirts. She really hated the fact that people were wearing those shirts in her courtroom. And she took special note on page 6 of that ruling to put everything that she herself had ruled was too defamatory toward me to use at trial. She took the time to actually list each one of those things that she ruled was too bad to use at trial. For what? To shame me? To punish me for having a campaign of people supporting me? And she decried the fact that she was, in her words, powerless to make the district attorney continue to prosecute me. And all I have to say about that is, if Diane Kiesel is watching this, she did not embarrass me. I argue she embarrassed herself. And she showed just how effective these defense campaigns are, and that's really scary to her because it's going to make her lose some power.
I just wanted
I don't have any other words for that.
I wanted to reiterate, you were at Rikers for 6 months. The campaign led ultimately to your release. But to explain what happened when we say your release, and I wanted to quote your son, Justin, who wrote, quote, "I was living in San Antonio, Texas when my mom was arrested. When she came home with the ankle monitor, the judge gave her 0 free time out of her apartment. She couldn't shop for groceries or walk her dog. She moved to a place with a small backyard so she and her dog Snuffles could have time in the outdoors. I moved to New York City with her so at least the dog could have regular walks. It seems so messed up to me that even though she wasn't convicted of anything, her dog had more freedom than my mom." Those are your son Justin's words. Your response, Tracy.
Also, at the time of me being allowed to be out on electronic monitoring, there were 2 males who were out on electronic monitoring with my same charge. Both of them were released from Rikers with time to run errands and to do exercise, to do whatever it is they wanted outside of their apartment. They were not considered a threat in the way I was considered a threat. I found that to be completely interesting. And you know, I want us to be careful that we don't look at this and say, Alvin Bragg did the right thing. He didn't. Alvin Bragg did the only thing he could to save himself. Half that courtroom was also filled up with the press on the day that he had to do my release. And, you know, there had been a man, Jose Alba, whom his office had written this robust dismissal for. You know, Jose Alba was accused of also committing murder, right? But it was found that he had defended his life. It was self-defense. And so his office wrote a 17-page dismissal to support Jose Alba being released. And in it, they said a knife was a normal thing to have behind the counter of a bodega. And I just thought how interesting that a knife is not normal to have in a kitchen where someone's in your home attacking you. But they made none of those arguments. There was about 1.5 pages of argument for my release. And so I just want us to be careful that we don't give him credit. The only reason he did the thing he did was because it was going to be that much worse for him when I won at trial and all of that press was present. They don't mind risking it if no one's watching. And that's why it was important to have the public watching, because then and only then did they become afraid. And only 10 days before I was set to go to trial and it became clear I would not take any plea that would cost me my license, that's when he came to court himself and said that he would release me.
And you're talking about, of course, your nursing license. Jocelyn Simonson,
yes.
We just have about a minute. You put Tracy McCarter's incredibly brave story in the context of this national movement around dismantling mass incarceration. As you wrote your book, Radical Acts of Justice, what gave you the most hope?
I was continually given moments of hope as I wrote this book. I talked to organizers all around the country who are often not paid and spending their time taking care of other people in the context of a system that does the opposite of care, that puts people in cages, that responds to things that it claims are harmful by saying it's protecting the community using policing, prosecution, and prisons. And so I was continually given hope, even as I saw people going through trauma and going through suffering. But let's be clear, the hope comes from people resisting the system at the same time that they're taking care of people. They're engaging in collective care, but they're also doing it by going into courtrooms and doing incredibly brave things in the face of court officers wearing guns or jailhouses that you have to walk into and post bail. Or, as we're seeing in Atlanta, the repression and criminalization of these very acts of collective care. So when I look around and I see this bravery and this care, and I see people starting to realize that we don't have to use criminal courts to address harm, that we can care for each other in other ways, that's where I get excited.
And Tracy McCarter, I want to give you the last word. You went from a woman defending yourself, being sent to jail, in this case Rikers, not used to reaching out to other people to help you. And what you've learned from this movement and what you say to other people who are afraid to raise their voice, who live in the shadows or are imprisoned in the shadows, what you would say to encourage them?
I would say that I understand the fear because the powers are so heavy against you. But I would say, find your voice anyway. Find ways to reach out to people and ask for help. Find ways to your community, because the community is waiting there to support us. And we give as much to this community as we take. So this community needs you just as much as you need them.
Tracy McCarter, we want to thank you so much for being with us, domestic violence survivor and champion for human rights, a nurse and a grandmother. Just received the Truth Out Center for Grassroots Journalism's Keely Shenwar Memorial Essay Prize for her essay, "As a Black woman accused of killing a white man, I was never innocent until proven guilty." We'll link to it at democracynow.org. And Jocelyn Simonson, congratulations on the publication of your book, law professor at Brooklyn Law School. Her book, Radical Acts of Justice, How Ordinary People Are Dismantling Incarceration. To see part 1 of our discussion, go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.